Why are we dying? What in biology and thermodynamics tells us that we do not need to be afraid of death? Let's talk today about the important and inevitable, our death. Have you ever wondered why and most importantly why we die? At first glance, this is a banal question because the answer is quite obvious. The death of any living organism occurs as a result of a combination of two processes: natural wear and functional disorders, diseases. Of course, there are still infections, injuries and murders, but all these are causes of violent, not natural death, which a priori depend on a combination of circumstances and individual characteristics. The important thing is that only natural and non-violent death is the inevitable outcome of life for each of us. This seems to us to be an alternative paradigm of existence, but in reality, it's not that simple at all. In fact, old age and disease are only tools, and the real cause of death is thermodynamics, the uncontrollable desire of any material structure to disintegrate and achieve a state of equilibrium. What is thermodynamics? When a mug of hot tea cools down on your table in the morning, the energy from the warm mug is slowly transferred to the table matter and the surrounding air. This happens until the tea has cooled to room temperature and the state of the system becomes equilibrium. This is how entropy, or a measure of chaos, works. The smaller the particles of matter are subordinated to any order, the higher the thermodynamics. In our world, a warm mug always cools down on a cool table, and not vice versa, which means thermodynamics is always growing. Similarly, the body of each of us is a thermodynamically non-equilibrium system that resists chaos with the help of mechanisms that use energy and components of the external environment to maintain its structures and functions, and therefore to preserve itself in time. A biological body is a complex system that is extremely far from the maximum of entropy. A simple rule works in this world. The more complex the structure, the stronger the external pressure of thermodynamics. In the language of simple comparisons, each of us is a complexly constructed mug of hot tea, which continuously struggles with conditional cooling with the help of various ingenious mechanisms that drain energy from the environment. At first glance, everything is very simple, but here an unusual surprise awaits us. The modern scientific doctrine of the individual struggle for existence and one's own health has so captured our consciousness that we forget the simple truth. Under the most favorable conditions of life, without any competition and in conditions of abundance of healthy food, the body dies anyway. Thermodynamics is killing him. It would seem that the laws of thermodynamics are winning, but no, it's just the opposite. Life has managed to create a very unusual, but very effective solution. Living biological systems circumvent the thermodynamic prohibition, not individually, but through reproduction or their own copying. Simply put, people are very unusual mugs of hot tea. By ourselves, we resist thermodynamics for a relatively short time, but thanks to the mechanism of copying reproduction, our biological life is practically immortal. This is where the core of the idea or the deep essence of our life lies. We just said that reproduction is copying life, but that's not really the right term. Only the genes are repeated, and the body itself is being built completely anew. Instead of the initially doomed task of preserving the complex structures of our body under the continuous pressure of entropy, life preserves only information about it. It's difficult conceptually, but in the end it's much more effective than trying to save the whole body. From this we can conclude that the creation and storage of information, and not media, is the main goal and main task of biological life of our type. And now let's look at it more simply and a little from the side. The mug of hot tea which, as we said earlier, our body looks like turns out to resist entropy not at all for the sake of itself and its own structure, but for the sake of the process of preserving hereditary information, which is passed on from generation to generation as in a relay race. At the same time, we remember that the pressure of entropy increases in strict accordance with the increasing complexity of the structure, which means that the circle, creating and maintaining a special system for transmitting genetic information, in fact sacrifices itself for a common goal. In order to learn how to transmit genetic information to the next generations, the circle had to greatly complicate its structure, thereby in fact shortening its own life. After all, if it were simpler, the entropy pressure would be less. Single atoms and molecules are also structures, but due to their relative simplicity, they are able to exist for billions of years. This suggests that if biological life on our planet really appeared as a result of a happy but random series of events, every living organism would lead a long individual struggle for existence and would not shorten its life with the help of a complex and, in fact, personally useless system of copying and transmitting information. It turns out that the ability to reproduce allows life to avoid inevitable disintegration, and biological death is actually a deliberate maneuver and a conscious payment for the preservation of information and the immortality of the life process as a whole. But a biological unit of this type could not appear on its own due to thermodynamic individual inefficiency. The fact that each of us has DNA suggests that when life appeared on this planet, someone or something already had an idea of how to deal with entropy systematically and not individually. Life on Earth immediately began to play out for a long time. Otherwise, simpler and more efficient living systems without a complex mechanism for transmitting information would inevitably be the first to appear. Therefore, let's sum up an encouraging result. Our biological death is not just a part of life, it is a deliberate, well-planned and well-prepared maneuver, thanks to which life actually overcomes death and bypasses the entropy barrier. The fact that we are such cunning and very strategically correct mugs with hot tea suggests that life is not a coincidence, but rather an experienced and well-organized force that appreciates and knows how to store the most important thing, information. But the identity of each of us is information.